For decades, television fans believed they understood the love story of Laura and Al Manzo. They watched Laura Ingalls grow up on Little House on the Prairie. They watched her face hardship, family problems, loss, and the confusion of becoming an adult. And then Dean Butler appeared as Al Manzo Wilder. He was older, calm, confident, and completely different from the young boys Laura had known before. The chemistry between them seemed natural. Their conversations felt sincere. Their romantic scenes felt emotional. And when Laura and Al Manzo finally moved toward marriage, millions of viewers believed they were watching one of television's most beautiful love stories. But there was something the audience did not fully see. Behind that romance was a teenage actress who was still trying to understand her own identity. Melissa Gilbert was only 15 years old when she was expected to play Laura as a young woman falling in love. Dean Butler was 23. At the time, viewers accepted the relationship as a sweet and innocent television romance. But years later, Melissa looked back at those scenes through a completely different lens. And what she said shocked many fans. She did not describe the experience as a secret love story. She did not reveal that she and Dean had secretly dated. Instead, she spoke about the discomfort of being a child who was expected to act like an adult. She questioned how the industry treated young performers. And she made fans look at Laura and Al Manzo's romance in a way they never had before. So why has Melissa Gilbert opened up about Dean Butler now? What was really happening behind the cameras? And was the famous romance between Laura and Al Manzo ever real outside the show? To understand her revelation, we need to go back to the beginning. When Little House on the Prairie premiered, audiences were introduced to the Ingalls family and their life in Walnut Grove. The show was set in a much simpler world. There were no smartphones, no social media, and no behind-the-scenes videos appearing online every day. Viewers saw only the episodes. They saw the costumes, the prairie fields, the family struggles, and the relationships created by the writers. That distance made the characters feel even more real. Melissa Gilbert played Laura Ingalls, a curious, energetic, and strong-willed young girl. Unlike many television characters, Laura was allowed to grow. She was not frozen in childhood. She changed from a playful little girl into a teenager, a student, and eventually a young woman. By the time Al Manzo Wilder arrived, Laura was entering a new stage of life. Al Manzo was portrayed as mature and dependable. He was not loud or aggressive. He was patient, serious, and caring. For many viewers, he represented the perfect romantic hero. Laura and Al Manzo's relationship also felt different from the usual television romances. They did not instantly become a couple. Their connection developed gradually. There were misunderstandings, disagreements, and emotional moments. The audience watched Laura become more confident, while Al Manzo slowly began to see her as an adult. That was the story the audience was given. And because Melissa and Dean performed those scenes so effectively, people began to wonder if the feelings were real. Fans wanted to know whether the two actors were secretly attracted to each other. They wanted to believe that the romance continued when the cameras were turned off. But there was a problem with that fantasy. Melissa was not an adult actress playing a teenager. She was actually a teenager. The romance looked mature on screen, but behind the scenes, Melissa was still growing up. Melissa Gilbert was born in Los Angeles in 1964 and entered the entertainment industry at a very young age. She was adopted by actor and comedian Paul Gilbert and actress Barbara Crane. Because she grew up around performers, auditions and television sets became familiar to her. She appeared in commercials before becoming a major television star. Then, when she was only 9 years old, she auditioned for the role that would define her life. Laura Ingalls was not just another part. It became Melissa's identity in the eyes of the public. Every week, viewers saw her laughing, crying, running to the fields, learning lessons, and growing up. But the audience did not see the long hours behind those episodes. They did not see the pages of dialogue Melissa had to memorize. They did not see the pressure of performing difficult emotional scenes as a child. And they did not see how strange it could be for a young actress to become famous before she had fully discovered who she was. Melissa was growing up while millions of people watched. When she was in public, strangers often expected her to behave like Laura. They expected the sweet voice, the innocent smile, and the same personality they saw on television. But Melissa was not Laura Ingalls. She was a real, teenager dealing with normal teenage emotions. The difference between the character and the person became more complicated as the show continued. Laura was growing older. That meant the story also demanded more adult emotion from Melissa. She had to show romantic interest. She had to perform emotional conversations. And eventually, she had to kiss an actor who was significantly older than her. To viewers, it was a romantic moment. To Melissa, it was also a moment of confusion and pressure. Dean Butler joined Little House on the Prairie as Almanzo Wilder. He was 23 years old. Melissa was 15. The age difference between the actors was not treated with the same level of public concern that it would receive today. The television industry had different standards. Young performers were often expected to behave professionally even when the situations around them were emotionally complicated. Dean's character was supposed to become Laura's romantic partner. That meant the writers created scenes in which Laura and Almanzo looked at each other with affection.
They had conversations about love. They experienced conflict. They shared romantic moments. And eventually, they kissed. The scene became memorable for fans. But Melissa later described the experience in a very different way. She has said that looking back, she feels disturbed by the fact that a 15-year-old girl was expected to fall in love with and kiss a much older man on screen. She emphasized that she was a child. That statement changed the way many fans understood the story. For years, people had talked about the romance as if it belonged to Melissa and Dean. But Melissa's comments made it clear that the romance belonged to Laura and Almanzo. It was written for the characters. It was performed for the audience. It was not evidence of a real-life relationship between the actors. That distinction is extremely important. The first kiss between Laura and Almanzo has often been remembered as a sweet television moment. Fans saw two characters who had slowly fallen in love. But behind that scene was a young actress facing a situation she was not emotionally prepared to understand. Melissa has described her reaction to the age difference as deeply uncomfortable. She was not an experienced adult actress. She was a teenager who had not yet experienced the type of relationship she was portraying. At the same time, Dean was expected to perform the scene professionally. He had to make the romance believable for the audience while also working with a young co-star. According to later discussions about the production, the age difference was obvious to the people involved. It was not a secret, but it was also not treated with the same scrutiny that audiences might apply today. That is why Melissa's later comments feel so powerful. She was not simply criticizing one particular scene. She was looking back at an entire system. A system where the audience wanted a convincing romance. The network wanted a successful storyline. The writers wanted emotional drama. And a young actress was expected to carry the responsibility of making the romance feel believable. The viewers saw the finished scene. Melissa lived through the uncomfortable process of creating it. For many years, fans hoped that Melissa Gilbert and Dean Butler had been secretly in love. The idea was attractive because their on-screen chemistry felt genuine. But strong acting does not automatically mean real romance. In fact, their performance may have been impressive precisely because it was acting. Melissa and Dean had to create a believable relationship between two fictional characters that required trust, timing, emotional control, and professionalism. It did not require them to be romantically involved in real life. The available interviews and later comments do not establish that Melissa and Dean were ever a secret couple. Instead, their relationship appears to have been based on their work together and the shared experience of making one of television's most famous family dramas. Dean has spoken positively about Melissa's abilities as a young actress. He has praised her talent and recognized how much responsibility she carried on the show. That is significant because Melissa was not simply one member of a large cast. She was the emotional center of the series. She worked with adult performers while still being a child herself. Dean's later comments have focused on her professionalism, talent, and the demands of the production rather than suggesting a hidden romance. So the truth may be less dramatic than the rumors. There was no secret love affair. There was no confirmed relationship behind the scenes. There was, however, a complicated professional situation involving a teenage actress and an adult actor. And that reality is powerful enough without adding a fictional scandal. Melissa Gilbert did not necessarily remain silent because she was hiding a secret relationship. Sometimes people stay quiet because they do not yet have the words to explain what happened to them. When Melissa was filming Little House on the Prairie, she was still young. She was surrounded by adults, producers, directors, writers, and actors. The success of the show depended on everyone continuing to work. A teenage performer may not feel empowered to question the decisions being made around her. Even if she felt uncomfortable, she still had to arrive on set and perform. She still had to smile for the audience. She still had to make the romance look convincing. Years later, people gain distance from their childhood experiences. They become parents. They learn more about boundaries. They understand how power works in entertainment. And they begin to look at old events with a more mature perspective. That appears to be what happened with Melissa. She is not only remembering a television scene. She is thinking about the young girl she was at the time. A girl who was treated as a professional performer but still needed protection as a child. Her recent comments also arrived at a time when audiences are examining old movies and television shows more critically. Scenes once considered innocent are now being questioned. Viewers are asking whether young actors understood what they were being asked to perform. They're also asking who was responsible for protecting them. Melissa's words connect to that larger conversation. The situation with Dean was only one part of Melissa's experience. She also faced the pressure of being judged by the public as she grew older. Audiences had first seen her as a child in braids and prairie clothing. Then, as Melissa entered her teenage years, the entertainment industry began to focus more heavily on her appearance. She was expected to transition from child star to young adult actress. That transition could be extremely difficult. The public wanted her to remain familiar. Hollywood wanted her to look older and more glamorous. Melissa was caught between those two demands. She had to prove that she could play mature roles, but she was also criticized whenever she changed. She has spoken in the past about body image, cosmetic surgery, aging, and the pressure placed on women in entertainment. Her later decision to embrace natural aging showed how much her outlook had changed. She no longer wanted to be trapped inside an image created by the industry. She wanted control over her own identity. This helps explain why her comments about Dean carry so much weight. Melissa has spent much of her adult life separating herself from the image that television created for her. Laura Ingalls was innocent, brave, and endlessly recognizable. Melissa was a real person who experienced fear, confusion, pressure, relationships, health problems, and personal change. Now, she is able to look back and say that the world did not fully understand what it meant to grow up on camera. It is also important to consider Dean Butler's side of the story. He was an adult actor working with a teenage co-star. The age difference created an unusual situation for both of them. Dean had to play a character who was romantically involved with Laura, but his real-life responsibility was to behave professionally around Melissa. The romance had to look convincing on screen without crossing boundaries in real life. That required a careful separation between character and actor. Dean has continued to speak warmly about Melissa's talent. He has described her as a remarkable child performer and has acknowledged that she carried a great deal of responsibility. His comments suggest respect rather than an attempt to turn the old television romance into a real-life love story. That is why it is important not to rewrite their history as a scandal without evidence. Melissa's discomfort does not automatically mean Dean intentionally harmed her. It does mean that the situation was complicated. A young actress can feel uncomfortable about a scene even when the adult actor behaves professionally. Both things can be true at the same time. The scene may have been handled respectfully on set, and Melissa can still look back decades later and feel that the situation itself was inappropriate or disturbing. Those two ideas do not contradict each other. There may not have been a real-life romance between Melissa Gilbert and Dean Butler, but there was a real connection in another sense. They shared a major chapter of their lives. They worked together during a period when Melissa was changing from a child into a young woman. Dean became part of that transition. He was connected to one of the most important roles she ever played. He also became part of the public image that followed her for decades. That kind of shared history can create a bond without becoming romantic. Sometimes friendship, respect, and professional trust survive longer than romance. The audience wanted Laura and Almanzo to be real. Melissa's revelation reminds us that actors do not owe viewers the fantasy they create on screen. The audience may love the characters. The actors still have their own private lives. Laura and Almanzo's relationship was fictional. The feelings that the audience experienced were real, but they belonged to the viewers. That is the strange power of television. A scene can be scripted, performed, edited, and broadcast. Yet the emotions it creates inside the audience can last for generations. Today, Melissa Gilbert is remembered for much more than her relationship with Almanzo. She is an actress, author, wife, mother, and public figure who has spoken openly about her difficult experiences. She has discussed the challenges of child stardom. She has written about addiction, insecurity, relationships, health problems, aging, and identity. She has also tried to create a quieter life away from the constant pressure of Hollywood. That journey gives a new meaning to her comments about Dean. She is no longer speaking as the young girl who had to perform a romance for television. She is speaking as an adult who can finally evaluate what happened. Her point is not that the audience was wrong to love Laura and Almanzo. Her point is that the audience did not know the entire story. They saw a polished romance. They did not see the anxiety, age difference, and responsibility behind the scenes. And they certainly did not see the private thoughts of the teenager performing those scenes. So, what did Melissa Gilbert finally reveal about Dean Butler? The answer is not the secret relationship many fans expected. She did not reveal that Dean was the love of her life. She did not confirm that they dated behind the cameras. Instead, she revealed something much more uncomfortable. She was 15 years old. Dean was 23. She was expected to portray a mature romantic relationship before she had fully experienced adulthood herself. Looking back today, Melissa sees that situation differently. What once appeared to viewers as a charming television romance now raises serious questions about the treatment of young performers. The chemistry between Laura and Almanzo was real for the audience. But that does not mean Melissa and Dean were romantically involved. Their believable performances were the result of acting, writing, direction, and professionalism. The truth is not necessarily a scandal. Sometimes the truth is simply that a beloved television fantasy was created by people working under pressure. And sometimes the most important revelation is understanding what the audience failed to notice. Melissa Gilbert was not an adult woman living a secret love story. She was a child actor growing up in front of millions of viewers. Today, she is finally able to speak about that experience in her own words. And her message is bigger than Dean Butler. It is about childhood, boundaries, Hollywood, and the difference between a character and the real person playing that character. Laura and Almanzo may always remain one of television's most beloved couples. But Melissa Gilbert's story reminds us that behind every perfect romance on screen, there are real people. And sometimes their truth is far more complicated than the story we were shown. What do you think about Melissa Gilbert's comments? Do you believe the age difference should have been handled differently at the time? And did her revelation change the way you see Laura and Almanzo's romance? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this deep look into the story behind Little House on the Prairie, like this video, subscribe to the channel and watch the next story on your screen. Thanks for watching.